Monday mornings were always the busiest. Employees hurried through the glass doors carrying coffee, laptops, and unfinished conversations. I unlocked the maintenance workshop at exactly 6 a.m., just like every other day. Before anyone else arrived, I walked through the building checking electrical panels, emergency exits, and security cameras. It wasn't technically my responsibility to inspect every camera. I simply preferred knowing everything worked. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 39 years old, a widowed single father raising my 8-year-old son, Liam. Most mornings began the same way. Wake Liam for school. Cook pancakes if we had enough time. Pack his lunch. Listen to him explain why dinosaurs would have made terrible office workers. Then drive him to school before heading to Titan Dynamics. Life was peaceful, simple, exactly the way I wanted it. 10 years earlier, my life had looked completely different. Back then, people called me by a code name instead of my real name. For 12 years, I served as a Navy SEAL. My work required silence, discipline, and disappearing without recognition. When my wife, Hannah, died in a car accident, I resigned. No medal, no ceremony, just one request. I need to raise my son. The military understood. Since then, I had never spoken about my past unless absolutely necessary. To everyone at Titan Dynamics, I was simply the quiet maintenance supervisor, the man who repaired elevators, fixed broken air conditioners, and somehow always knew when a machine was about to fail before anyone else noticed. That morning, the company prepared for its annual executive security demonstration. Every department manager attended. The event was led personally by our CEO, Victoria Reynolds. Victoria was brilliant. She had rescued 3 struggling companies before turning Titan Dynamics into an industry leader. She was also a 3rd-degree black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. She often reminded employees that confidence came from preparation. Many admired her. Some feared her. Everyone respected her. By 9 o'clock, the boardroom filled with executives. Large digital screens displayed security layouts for the headquarters. Loading docks, emergency exits, camera locations, access points. Victoria confidently addressed the room. This year's assessment confirms our headquarters meets every recommended security standard. Several consultants nodded proudly. Applause followed. I quietly studied one diagram. Something immediately caught my attention. Camera 27. It covered the loading dock. On paper, it looked perfect. In reality, it wasn't. When Victoria asked whether anyone had questions, I slowly raised my hand. She smiled politely. Yes. The loading dock has a blind spot. Several executives turned toward me. Victoria glanced at the diagram. Our consultants disagree. They measured the angles. They measured the original angles. I answered calmly. The replacement camera installed last winter sits 6 inches lower. She frowned. 6 inches? Enough to hide someone behind the south delivery column. One consultant laughed. Impossible. I installed it myself. I replied. The room became quiet. Victoria folded her arms. So you're saying 6 independent security firms overlooked something that only the maintenance supervisor noticed? I don't know what they noticed. I only know what I see every morning. One vice president whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Maybe we should promote the janitor to chief of security. Laughter echoed around the room. I didn't react. Victoria walked toward the center of the boardroom. I appreciate confidence, but extraordinary claims require proof. She removed her blazer and placed it neatly over a chair, then rolled up the sleeves of her white shirt. As many of you know, I've trained in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for over 15 years. The room applauded. She smiled. If Mr. Walker believes our security can be defeated, perhaps he can demonstrate how. Several employees quickly cleared an open area. I quietly shook my head. I'm not interested. She raised an eyebrow. Why not? I came to repair equipment, not compete. One executive laughed. Sounds like he's backing down. Victoria looked directly at me. Are you afraid of losing? I answered honestly. No. What are you afraid of? I hesitated, then quietly said, embarrassing you. The laughter immediately stopped. Victoria's smile faded. That's a bold statement. It isn't meant to be. It's simply experience. She removed her watch and handed it to an assistant. I insist. I sighed softly. I've learned the hardest fights are usually the unnecessary ones. She stepped into a balanced stance. This isn't a fight. It's a demonstration. She reached toward my wrist using a controlled grip intended to off-balance me. The movement was quick, precise, technically excellent, without using strength, without causing pain. I rotated half a step, redirected her momentum, and gently guided her balance past mine. Before anyone realized what had happened, Victoria found herself standing exactly where she had started, perfectly unharmed, completely unable to explain how she'd missed. Her eyes widened. She immediately tried again. Different angle, different grip. The result was identical. She never touched me. The room became eerily silent. Even the consultants stopped smiling. Victoria lowered her hands. Where did you learn that? I picked up my toolbox. A long time ago. Before I could leave, the company chairman slowly stood from his seat. 80-year-old Charles Bennett had rarely spoken during meetings. But now he smiled with quiet pride. I've waited 10 years for this conversation. He looked around the stunned executives. Most of you believe Ethan Walker repairs buildings. He nodded toward me. He does. But before that, he spent 12 years protecting people most of us will never meet. The chairman paused, then added the one sentence that made every executive in the room forget about security demonstrations altogether. The Pentagon never knew him as Ethan Walker. They knew him by a name very few people were ever allowed to say aloud. Ghost sixth, the boardroom remained completely silent. No one laughed anymore. Every executive stared at Ethan as though they were seeing him for the first time. Victoria slowly lowered her hands. Ghost six, the elderly chairman, Charles Bennett, nodded. That's what they called him. I served on a Veterans Advisory Committee years ago. His real record is classified, but I know enough to recognize extraordinary service. He looked toward Ethan. He never wanted anyone here to know. Ethan quietly sighed. I still don't. Victoria looked embarrassed. Why didn't you tell us? Ethan smiled gently. Because I wasn't hired for what I used to be. I was hired to maintain this building. And that's exactly what I've been doing. One of the security consultants stepped forward. If your observations about the loading dock are correct, would you show us? Ethan nodded. Of course. The entire executive team followed him downstairs. At the loading dock, everything looked perfectly normal. Rows of delivery trucks, concrete support columns, security cameras mounted above. The consultant pointed toward camera 27. It covers the entire entrance. Ethan smiled. Watch carefully. He asked one employee to stand near the delivery truck. Another remained inside the security office watching the camera feed. Ethan quietly walked behind one of the concrete columns. Then he disappeared. The security officer frowned at the monitor. I lost him. Several executives hurried outside. They looked around in confusion. Ethan calmly stepped out from behind the column. I never left the loading dock. The consultant checked the camera angle. He froze. The camera had indeed been mounted several inches lower during maintenance months earlier. That tiny difference created a narrow blind spot. Enough for a determined intruder to exploit. Victoria slowly shook her head. You were right. Ethan simply nodded. I wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. I wanted the building safer. The consultants immediately began discussing redesigns. Before anyone could continue, Ethan's phone vibrated. He smiled after reading the message. My son's school play starts in 45 minutes. I need to leave. Victoria looked surprised. In the middle of this? He slipped his phone into his pocket. I promised Liam I'd be there. I've missed enough important moments in one lifetime. Without waiting for praise, he quietly walked away. That afternoon, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about him. She had built billion-dollar companies by trusting credentials, titles, and achievements. Yet the most capable person in the room wore worn work boots and carried a toolbox. The following morning, she invited Ethan to breakfast. I owe you an apology. He smiled. You don't owe me anything. I judged you. You judged my clothes. Not my character. There's a difference. She looked down. There shouldn't have been. She slid a folder across the table. I'd like you to become director of corporate security. The salary was nearly triple his current income. Ethan quietly closed the folder. I'm honored. But no. Victoria blinked. No. My son's childhood only happens once. My current schedule lets me coach his baseball team, help with homework, be home for dinner. I've already spent too many years missing birthdays. No promotion is worth repeating that mistake. For the first time in years, Victoria realized success wasn't measured only by titles. A week later, she announced company-wide changes. Every employee, from custodians to executives, would now participate in security planning. Suggestions would be evaluated by merit instead of job title. Anonymous improvement proposals would be reviewed monthly. Most importantly, every new manager would complete leadership training focused on humility and respect. During the meeting, she openly admitted her mistake. I assumed experience always wears an expensive suit. I was wrong. Months later, the company hosted its annual Employee Appreciation Day. Families were invited. Children laughed as they explored engineering exhibits. Liam proudly introduced Ethan to his classmates. "My dad fixes everything." Ethan laughed. "I try." Victoria overheard the conversation. She smiled. He forgot to mention he once protected the country. Liam looked up at his father. "You were really a Navy SEAL?" Ethan knelt beside him. "I was." "Were you a hero?" Ethan thought carefully before answering. "No. I worked with heroes." The real challenge wasn't learning how to fight. What was it? Learning when not to. Liam nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be like you." Ethan smiled. "I hope you're better." Years later, Titan Dynamics became known not only for innovation, but for its unique workplace culture. Ideas were welcomed from everyone. Executives regularly visited maintenance workshops. Engineers asked janitors for observations. Interns challenged vice presidents without fear. Near the company entrance stood a simple plaque installed by Victoria. It didn't mention military service. It didn't mention classified missions. Instead, it read, "The best leaders listen before they judge." The greatest experts often wear ordinary clothes. One afternoon, a new employee asked Victoria why the plaque mattered so much. She smiled. "Because one day, I almost ignored the wisest person in the building. Simply because I mistook humility for weakness." At that moment, Ethan walked through the lobby carrying his familiar toolbox. Employees greeted him with warm smiles. Some knew pieces of his past. Most didn't. It never mattered to him. His greatest achievement wasn't surviving dangerous missions or earning secret commendations. It was hearing one small voice every evening when he opened his front door. "Dad." Liam would race into his arms without caring about medals, ranks, or titles. And Ethan always believed that was the highest honor he would ever receive. Because while the world admired the man once known as Ghost 6, the title he treasured most would always be the simplest one of all.